Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we're going to be making a simple bird feeder. Well, whether you're a seasoned veteran woodworker or whether you're just getting into the hobby, a bird feeder is quite possibly one of the easiest projects that you could come up with, while giving you that instant satisfaction of being able to bang off a couple of them in just a couple hours in an afternoon. So we're going to get going on this project, but what we're going to be using for this is some 3/4 inch pine. So the first pieces that we're going to cut on this bird feeder will be the uprights, and we're going to need 2 of them, and you're going to want to cut pieces that are 3 1/4 inches wide by 9 inches long. You've got your 2 pieces cut. And now, measuring from the bottom up, we want to measure 7 1/8 of an inch. And at that point, we want to cut a 45 off of this side and then a joining 45 off of the other side at the 7 1/8 of an inch mark. Well, you saw there that we placed a mark, but only one mark, on this edge right here at the 7 1/8. And the beauty of this is that if you use a stop on your fence, you can cut your 45 and then all you need to do is flip it around and it'll cut the other one exactly the same. So we'll go ahead and do that on both of these pieces. So one of the main components of this bird feeder is some of this stuff, and that would be 5/64 thick plexi. And what we need to do is, on both of these side pieces that you just cut, we need to set our fence at 1/4 inch from the blade. We need to set our blade height at 1/4 inch, and we need to run this through the saw to place a dado, the thickness of the blade kerf, all the way down from top to bottom on one side of these sides, which will be the inside now. So on the one side here, 1/4 inch from the edge, we're going to run a 1/4 inch deep dado. Now at this point you've got your dados cut. Just test your plexi to make sure that it fits nicely in there. If you're using thicker plexi, then by all means make a wider dado. It's not that big of a deal, but this fits nicely. You don't want it too snug, but it does fit nicely in here, so we're going to carry on with the project. So that now is the side pieces, for the most part, done. Simple, huh? The next thing you need to do is we need to make the peak or the roof for this thing. So what we're going to do is I've got this piece of pine here. It's 4 inches wide and 12 inches long. And we're going to take it over to the table saw and cut some 45s in this piece. Well, the setup that we've got here is The blade of the table saw is raised to the proper height for this size of stock, which is 3/4 pine, and we've got the angle of the blade set at 45 degrees. And like I said, this is a 12-inch long piece, 4 inches wide, and what we're going to do is run this through just to trim just enough off the edge to make this a 45-degree angle. Once we get it around to the other side, we're going to rotate it and we're going to cut this side in the same fashion. And I'm going to show you what that looks like once I get it cut. So this is what we're looking at now, and you can see that we've chamfered both of these sides at 45 degrees. Now what we'd like to do is turn the board over. We're going to put our fence on the opposite side of the blade, and we're going to run a 45-degree kerf right up in through one side of these 45s, and it only has to go in maybe 1/4 of an inch. So you can go ahead, set up your fence, and cut that one kerf. Well, I'll just show you that kerf there. And what this kerf is for will be for a spline that's going to go in here to help join the two edges of the roof together. So now you want to go ahead and reset your blade back to 90 degrees to your table, and you want to cut this now in 5.5-inch lengths. Make sure you square off the one end before you start cutting them to length, just to make sure that everything is nice and square. So square off the one end and then cut 5.5 inches and 5.5 inches. The last piece that you need to cut is going to be for the base, and that's going to be some 3/4 inch pine, and it's going to be 3.5 inches by 5 inches. And now with your base piece cut, these are all the parts with the exception of the plexi. This is all the parts that you require for this bird feeder. We do have to make some adjustments on a couple of the pieces, but I'll just show you how this goes together, and you can get the idea of what it's going to look like. And that, of course, just sits there like that. So what we want to do now is we're going to have to get some thin material that will fit in this spline. We will measure, when holding this together, what that distance is right there, and we will cut a strip of whatever that thickness is to go in there. From there, we're going to sand this. Then we're going to glue along here, making sure to put glue in the slots, add the spline, and glue our roof together. Well, it turns out that between this one and the other slot, it's 9/16 across between the two end to end. So the length of that slot is 9/16, and the thickness of it was 7/64, I believe. So I've cut a piece of maple, and what we're going to do is we're going to place some glue in the slot. We're going to glue in our spline like that, and then we're going to glue it into the other side, and we're going to clamp this up and let this dry. And that will be one heck of a strong joint. And once it's all dried up, I'm going to flush cut this end off and flush cut this end off. So like I said, we're just going to put a little bit of glue in this slot here. You don't need a lot. And a little on the surface of the 45. We're just going to smear that around there. A little more. Just like that. And we're going to take our spline and just place it in our slot. And we're going to have some squeeze out, just like that, but that's okay. It's no big deal. So sit that there now and put a little bit of glue into your other slot. Rub that all over there. And then we're going to join these two together via the spline, just like that. And now we're going to clamp this up and clean up the squeeze out now. Okay, so the roof is clamped up, and now we're just going to sit this off to the side to dry. While we're waiting for this to dry, we're going to go ahead and work on attaching those two uprights to the base. Now, before we go too crazy in setting up and gluing together this base, I'd like to do a couple little steps of, what would you call it? Something to make it a little more aesthetically pleasing. And what I would like to do is on this smaller side of the base, I'd like to put one round over, a 1/4 inch round over on each of the top edges. As well on the outside uprights of the sides, I'd also like to do a 1/4 inch round over on those. Now, once that's done, we can start the assembly. And let me just say that there's a lot of ways that you can assemble this. You can glue it and use nails as your extra fastener. You can use screws if you'd like. You can pocket hole this thing. But I think what I'd like to do is just a straight up butt joint on both sides, glued. And once the glue is dry, what I'd like to do is drill a 3/16 inch hole in a couple places on each side and drive in with some glue on it some 3/16 inch dowels to sort of pin the side and give it that extra strength. Not to mention that using dowels looks so much more professional than a nail or a screw. So you can attach it however you want, but I'm going to go ahead, route these edges, and then I'm going to come back, we're going to glue this butt joint together, and then I'm going to show you what we're going to do with those dowels. Before we glue this together, we've got the routing done. You can see there, let me just show you, there you go. There is one part that I did forget, but it's not too late to do it, which is a good thing. What we want to do is from the bottom here up, measure 7 3/4 inches, and centered on the width here, we want to drill a 5/16 diameter hole about 3 inches deep into each one of the insides of these side walls. So we're going to go ahead and drill those. Once we get that done, give the whole thing a good sanding. Well, the best way that I can suggest to put this base together, now that you have the hole that I forgot to tell you about drilled, is to mark your halves. And what I mean by that is on the bottom of your side piece, put a mark at the center. On your base, put a mark at your center. And when you glue them together, line up your center marks. So we're going to go ahead and glue one side of this together, and it just glues up just like this. Can you see that? So we're going to glue the one side together, clamp it, and let it set up for a little bit, and then we're going to get into what we're going to do with this hole. And what we're going to do with that is you're going to need a 5/16 inch dowel, and you're going to need to cut that 5/16 inch dowel to a measurement of 4 1/4 inches. But for now, let's glue up this side, and then we'll come back to that dowel in the other side. Well, we've got this clamped up, and it's kind of tacked up on its own. So what we need to do now is put a bit of glue in this 5/16 inch hole and put our dowel in. From there, we need to put some glue into this side, a little bit of glue along the bottom, and then again, lining up our centers, we're going to put this together and clamp it and let it dry up. So this is what we've got so far glued together, and this block here is just a spacer block to help keep everything squared. That'll be pulled out in just a minute once I'm done drilling here. But what we need to do is along the bottom draw a line 3/8 of an inch up from the bottom of each side, and then we're going to come in 1/2 an inch from each side, and we're going to drill a 3/16 inch hole. And I think we're going to go 1.5 inches deep into this board. Once we get all 4 holes drilled, then we'll come back and I'll show you what we're going to do with those dowels that I spoke about. Well, I've got 1 hole drilled here, and I just want to show you as an example what it is that we're going to do with this, and then I'll go ahead off camera and do the rest. So we're just going to squeeze some glue into this hole. You don't need a whole lot. And once you get it in, I've cut off some 2-inch lengths of 3/16 inch dowel, and we're just going to take it and just like a nail, hammer it down inside. That glue will dry now, and that's going to go a long way to strengthening up this joint. From there, once it's dried up, we'll take a flush cut saw and just trim off the piece protruding and then resand the top of this. While we're waiting for that to dry up with the dowels and all that jazz, we're going to go back to our roof piece. And what we need to do is we need to come in 1 5/8 of an inch from either side and drill a 3/16 inch hole straight down through the middle of the peak to come out through the other side. So 1 5/8 in, 1 5/8 in, and a 3/16 hole straight down through. Now that you've got those holes drilled, go ahead and give this roof a really good sanding. You've got the roof sanded, you've got the holes drilled. There's only one more thing to do to the roof, and that's to take 5 feet of 1/8 inch rope and just feed it down through those 3/16 of an inch holes. It might be a little bit of a bother to thread her in there, depending on how you cut the ends of your rope, but thread it in so that one end will go in here and one end will go in the other hole, so that you'll have a big loop here, and your loose ends will hang down at the bottom. And it should look something like that. So, with this now being done, put this aside and let's cut the plexi while we're waiting for the body to dry up. Now, the thing here with this thinner plexi is that you don't really require to cut it on the table saw. And I'll show you what I mean. I've kind of got it clamped in here. Let me just loosen it up a bit. If you've been following the dimensions so far, what you're going to need is 2 pieces of this plexi that are 3 7/8 inch wide and 6.5 inches long. Now normally I would cut this stuff on the table saw, but I just want to show you that that's not really necessary. So we'll just score here at 3 7/8 to give us a mark, and then we'll go over here at 3 7/8 to give us another mark. And if we join up those 2 lines, and they're a little difficult to see, but we will be able to see them. So right there, 3 7/8, that's our mark. Just make sure that everything is held securely in place here. I'll just clamp that back in to assist me. And line up your arrows or your marks. Take your X-Acto knife, now be careful here, but just score down that line. Once you get the score, snap it. That's it, 3 7/8. Now we'll do the same thing at the 6 1/2 mark to get our length, but I'll go ahead now and score this other one, and we'll cut our pieces of plexi for this bird feeder. And with that there, the plexi now slides into our dados that we cut earlier, and it's all nicely sealed in there. There's only one problem. Can't get any bird seed out. Well, with the plexi here now, what we need is to put an opening for our bird seed. And for that, we're going to take it over to the scroll saw with a fine blade. Probably a number 3 would do just fine. But we're going to cut a 1 3/4 inch wide by a 5/8 inch high opening. And we're going to round both sides of that just to make it look better. And plus, you don't want the sharp edges with the birds. Wouldn't want them to hurt their little beaks. But I'm going to cut that opening 1 3/4 wide by 5/8 high with rounded corners. And then I'm going to get this one cut and bring it back to you and show you what it looks like. And we're going to pretty much wrap this one up after that. Well, this is all dried up and we've got it all sanded. Looks great for scrap pine. I mean, it looks fantastic. The holes here, I don't know how well that's going to show on camera, but the holes underneath for the food exit have been cut. I just want to tell you, you may want to go real slow on the scroll saw when cutting these because the plexi melts and joins back together. So take it easy, go slow, take your time. Anyway, make sure you sand the inside of these too to take off any rough edges. So these pieces of plexi now just sit in those kerfs that we made. So everything now is enclosed. And the final bit of assembly is taking your roof with your your 1 piece of rope here, and one piece ties around one side of this dowel. And I would suggest, once you get it tied, to place some glue on there, probably some CA glue to keep it from slipping. So one piece goes on this side of our bird feeder, and the other piece goes on this side. And like I said, just tie it in a double knot and with some CA glue on there to keep it from slipping. And once the CA is dry, obviously you'll trim off these ends. You're not going to leave it like that. I certainly am not going to, but for the sake of the video, I'm not going to bother trimming it. And then from there, this assembly hangs just like this in your tree. And let me just back this up a bit here so you can see it. There you go. And it's quite attractive. It's not too large. It's not too intrusive in your backyard or your front yard. And there's a nice little platform here for the birds to come to. And when it needs time for filling, this thing is hanging from the tree. No need to take it down. You lift this up and you can pour your food into the opening at the top. And then you just lower that lid back down and away you go. The animals, for the most part, don't have the coordination to lift this up and pig out on the big opening in the top. So they'll just be eating the seeds that come out through the bottom. And there you have it. A bird feeder. Guys, this is a great project, a great way to use up scrap. You don't have to use pine. You can use whatever you'd like, whether it be maple, poplar, walnut, I don't care what it is. If it's a piece of scrap, why not use it up? And this is a great project to do it. Like I said before, you just have to lift the lid, fill the feeder, put the lid back down, and hey, Bob's your uncle, right? Birds will love it. Just 1 or 2 little notes. Can't put the bare wood like this outside. It will seep up all of that moisture, and although it will age and start to warp, and you could if you wanted to, I usually put several coats of like a varnish on it just to protect it a little bit from the elements and makes it last a little longer. The other one thing I'd like to point out, much like a birdhouse, please don't put perches on these. Don't stick a perch out the front thinking that you're being this nice guy and making it so easy for the birds to sit there. You probably are. However, you're also making it easy for the predators that are after those birds to have somewhere to sit. So something to keep in mind. Perches really should not be used when it comes to bird houses or bird feeders. Guys, I hope you're going to try this project and make the birds in your neighborhood happy. Sit back from your window there, your shop, and look out and watch all the little birds come there feeding. It's a great kind of therapy, and heck knows I need therapy. Guys, thanks for watching, and I'm going to see you again next week with yet another woodworking video.